Huh? Tonight is your last night, Daniel. By dawn, your life will be over. A grain of white powder slipped into the wine, dissolving without a trace. The stem of the glass quivered in Lila Hart's hand as she swirled the crimson liquid, candlelight dancing across its surface. Her lips curved into a gentle smile, a mask she had worn for years. To anyone watching, it was devotion. To her, it was murder wrapped in velvet. The poison vanished into the fragrance of vintage Cabernet, waiting for its victim's final sip. Lila whispered again, softer, almost tender. No one will ever suspect. Picture this. Across the table sits the person you built your life around, the one you trust beyond all others. Yet in her hands, she carries your end. What would you fear more? The poison in your glass, or the betrayal in her eyes? If stories like this grip you, make sure to follow this channel, because the darkest betrayals are only beginning. Only days before that whisper, the Mercers' lives had shifted with a single call. Daniel Mercer, 52, respected for his honesty and hard work, was told by his family's attorney that an old trust had matured. The scale was staggering. Properties across 3 states, investments from decades ago, and nearly $500 million in liquid assets. But it came with strings, clauses written in unbreakable legal language, deadlines carved in steel. Daniel listened quietly, accepting the fortune with humility. He had built his own empire, never expecting to inherit wealth from his late aunt. Gratitude mingled with a sense of duty, not desire. But across the dining table, Lila's reaction told another story. Her gasp melted into a radiant smile, but her eyes flashed with something sharp, hungry, undeniable. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing close, yet her mind had already left him. In that instant, Daniel imagined sharing his fortune with the woman he loved. In that same instant, Lila imagined life without him. Daniel Mercer was the kind of man people trusted instinctively. Raised in a modest town despite the weight of his family name, he built a trucking empire with grit and patience. To his employees, he was steady, never late on payroll, always remembering names. To his neighbors, he was humble, mowing his lawn, jogging at dawn, fixing his own fence. He carried himself with a decency that made others feel safe. Yet his greatest strength was also his flaw. He trusted too easily. Daniel believed loyalty was unbreakable once given. Beside him was Lila, luminous, 10 years younger, her laughter like polished glass. At church, she was praised for elegance. At dinners, she commanded every glance. But beneath her beauty lay a fracture unseen. Her childhood was carved by scarcity and shame. A gambler father, a mother who taught her that beauty was survival. Her smile had been sharpened into a weapon, her grace into currency. To the outside world, she was perfection. To herself, she was a woman determined never to be powerless again, even if that meant betrayal, even if it meant blood. That night, while Daniel slept soundly, Lila lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The inheritance pulsed in her mind, dazzling yet unreachable with him alive. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, a vibration she knew too well. She slipped into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. On the glowing screen, a message from CV. Her fingers typed quickly. Daniel's aunt left him millions, nearly $500 million, if only he weren't in the way. Seconds later, a reply appeared, slick and predatory. Then maybe we make sure he isn't. The words chilled her, yet she didn't delete them. Instead, she stared into the mirror. Flawless skin, painted lips, eyes no longer belonging to a wife. They belonged to a conspirator, rehearsing her role in a darker tomorrow. And so, while Daniel dreamed of building a future together, Lila dreamed of burying him beneath it. Cody Vance was everything Daniel wasn't: loud, reckless, hungry for the world. When Lila met him at the gym, He promised her more than toned arms. He promised escape. He talked about private villas in Key Largo, champagne on yachts in St. Barth, and nights where the only rule was excess. "With me, you'll never have to ask," he told her. "Everything will be ours, fast and endless." But paradise had cracks. Cody silenced calls the moment his phone lit up. A credit card was declined at dinner, and he brushed it off with a laugh. Once, Lila noticed a man waiting in a black sedan outside his apartment. Cody said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The truth was simple. Cody was drowning in debt. To him, Daniel's inheritance wasn't just wealth, it was oxygen. And Lila, already restless in her marriage, started to believe Cody's dream could be real if Daniel wasn't standing in their way. Lila didn't reach for a gun or a knife. She chose something quieter. It started with tea before bed. "Good for your nerves," she said. Then came new vitamins at breakfast. "Extra strength, just for you." After his morning run, she handed Daniel a smoothie, smiling as she watched him drink. None of it seemed dangerous. All of it seemed caring. Within weeks, Daniel began to change. He no longer jogged at dawn. He struggled on the stairs, breathless after only a few steps. At dinner, his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his fork. He told himself it was stress, the inheritance, the lawyers, the long hours at the company. But Lila was always there with an answer before the question was asked. "Rest more, darling. Drink this, it will help. You've been carrying too much." To friends and neighbors, she played the devoted wife. She told them Daniel was overworked, maybe pushing himself too hard. They nodded, impressed by her patience. Behind closed doors, she watched his strength slip away like sand through glass. No drama, no sudden collapse. Just a man who grew weaker by the day, never suspecting that the hands caring for him were also the hands draining him. And the cruelest part, Daniel still kissed her cheek every night, thanking her for looking after him. The first suspicion didn't fall on Lila. It fell on the gardener. Mr. Ellery had worked the Mercer estate for years, a quiet man in a faded cap, hands always smelling of soil and fertilizer. One afternoon, Daniel noticed a bitter, chemical odor drifting from the tool shed. When he stepped inside, he saw unlabeled bottles stacked on the shelf, a rusted sprayer, and a pair of gloves stained a strange yellow. Ellery appeared in the doorway. "New mix," he muttered. "Winter's tough on the roots." His eyes never quite met Daniel's. That night at dinner, Lila tilted her head and asked, almost casually, "Do you think Ellery seems different lately?" "I hope he's not careless with all those chemicals." Daniel replayed the smell, the stains, the uneasy look. By morning, he had convinced himself the gardener might be the reason for his failing health. He watched Ellery from the window, saw him spraying near the roses, and wondered if poison could drift where it wasn't meant to. The truth was closer than he realized. But for now, his suspicion bent in the wrong direction, and Lila let it bend. Daniel had always believed marriage was a steady road. Hard work, trust, forgiveness where needed. But lately, that road felt cracked. He noticed the way Lila's laughter reached others more easily than it reached him. She smiled at neighbors, charmed friends at church, yet when their eyes met across the table, something was missing. A distance, thin but sharp, like glass between them. On nights when he lay awake, dizzy and restless, he wondered if the problem was him. Maybe he had buried himself too deeply in work, too consumed by contracts and schedules. Maybe the inheritance had added a pressure he hadn't seen. Was he growing cold without realizing? Daniel replayed small moments. The times he had skipped dinner for late meetings, the weekends he had spent at the office instead of beside her. He felt guilt gnawing at him, whispering that love, once neglected, withers quietly. So when his body weakened, he blamed himself. When her touch felt distant, he blamed himself. Even as the house grew colder, he told himself Lila was still there. He just had to reach harder. What he couldn't see was that she had already let go. Daniel reached a breaking point one gray morning. The dizziness wouldn't leave. His vision blurred during meetings. His hands shook when signing papers. Once, driving home, he nearly drifted across the lane. He couldn't ignore it anymore. But he also couldn't walk into his usual doctor's office. Too many eyes knew his name. Too many questions would circle back to Lila. So he drove 2 towns over, to a small private clinic tucked behind a pharmacy. There he described everything. The headaches, the tremors, the exhaustion that clung no matter how much he slept. The doctor, an older man with silver hair and a calm stare, ordered tests. Blood work, urine, toxicology panels. Hours later, he returned with a folder in hand and a weight in his voice. "Mr. Mercer, your results show elevated toxins. Nothing conclusive yet, but the pattern suggests repeated low-level poisoning." Daniel froze. Poisoning? The word felt foreign, absurd, and yet his body was proof. "Do you handle chemicals at work?" the doctor asked. "No," Daniel answered firmly. The doctor leaned forward, eyes steady. "Then someone close to you is exposing you." Slowly, consistently, Daniel left the clinic with his heart pounding. If this was true, then his enemy wasn't hidden in shadows. It was inside his own home. Daniel left the clinic with a new resolve. If poison was in his system, then someone wanted him gone. And if that someone was Lila, the only way to know for certain was to play along. So he began to act weaker than he felt. He let his shoulders sag, his steps drag. At dinner, he coughed into his napkin and pushed food away. He allowed his hand to tremble when lifting a glass, his voice to break when saying her name. Lila leaned closer each time, her tone soaked with concern. "Oh, darling, you mustn't push yourself. Let me take care of everything." But behind her soft smile, Daniel caught flickers, tiny sparks of satisfaction she didn't hide well enough. At night, when she thought he was asleep, he watched her slip from bed, phone glowing in her hand. Her whispers carried down the hall. "It's working." "He's fading faster than ever." Daniel closed his eyes, steadying his breath, forcing his body to stay limp. Every word she spoke confirmed it. He wasn't imagining. The woman he trusted most was rehearsing his funeral. Daniel knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed someone sharp, discreet, and unafraid to stare into darkness. That someone was Nora Quinn. A former detective turned private investigator, Nora carried herself with quiet confidence and a knack for seeing through lies. When Daniel told her everything, the symptoms, the inheritance, the late-night whispers, she didn't flinch. She simply nodded and said, "Then we catch her in her own game." Within days, Nora had placed discreet cameras in the kitchen and living room, hidden in vents and behind books. She cloned Lila's phone records, traced her calls, and followed her car across town. The trail led, again and again, to Cody Vance. But the work was dangerous. One evening, while adjusting a hidden recorder beneath the dining table, Nora heard footsteps on the stairs. Lila was coming down early. For a breathless moment, Nora lay flat on the floor, heart pounding, praying the shadows held her. Only when Lila turned toward the kitchen did Nora slip out the back door, silent as smoke. Later, she handed Daniel a flash drive. "Your instincts were right," she said, her voice low. "They're not just betraying you. They're planning to finish you." And for the first time, Daniel felt the shift of power. Proof was finally on his side. By now, Nora's evidence was mounting. Calls to Cody, receipts, even whispers caught on tape. But Lila wasn't careless. She tried to scatter smoke. One afternoon, Daniel found a letter slipped into his office drawer. It bore no signature, but the words were sharp. Richard Hale hasn't forgotten what you stole. Payback is coming. Richard Hale, his former business partner, a man he hadn't seen in years. The timing was too neat. That evening, over dinner, Lila leaned in with a practiced sigh. Strange, isn't it? Your old partner's name shows up just as your health collapses. Maybe he never forgave you. For a moment, Daniel wavered. Could Hale have returned for revenge? But when Nora examined the letter, her verdict was blunt. Fake. The phrasing is wrong, the paper too new. Someone wants you looking in the wrong direction. Daniel felt a chill. If Lila was desperate enough to forge ghosts from his past, then she knew the walls were closing in. Cody Vance had never been a patient man. Luxury for him was something grabbed, not earned, not waited for. In a dim motel room off the highway, Lila sat across from him, hands twisting in her lap. Daniel was still alive, weaker but breathing, and Cody's temper was fraying. You said he was fading, Cody snapped, pacing the stained carpet. 2 months, Lila. 2 months of tea and vitamins, and the guy's still walking around? Do you know what that means? Every day he breathes, you risk everything slipping away. Lila tried to calm him, whispering that Daniel was already suspicious, that pushing too fast could backfire. But Cody's grin was cold. Backfire? What's worse? Him figuring it out, or us being broke while creditors pound at my door? He leaned close, his voice a growl. We finish it. Tonight. Strong dose, no hesitation. You pour, he drinks, we're free. Lila's heart hammered. She had crossed many lines, but this was no longer whispers or patience. This was a command. And for the first time, she realized Cody wasn't dreaming of paradise with her. He was demanding survival for himself. Cody's demand still rang in Lila's ears. Tonight. Strong dose. No hesitation, but haste carried danger. Daniel's inheritance wasn't a bag of money waiting at the door. It was bound in legal steel. And Lila knew if they didn't respect those clauses, killing him too quickly could cost them everything. The trust spelled it out clearly. The estate would only pass to a surviving spouse if the marriage was intact and the death deemed natural. Any suspicion, any foul play, and the money would vanish to distant relatives. So Lila and Cody shifted from whispers of poison to whispers of paperwork. In another late-night meeting, papers scattered across Cody's kitchen table, he leaned over a forged document template. All we need is the right doctor, the right words, he said. Stress-induced heart failure. Signed, sealed, unquestioned. Lila's eyes lingered on the clause, reading it again and again. If Daniel's decline looked slow and inevitable, she could walk away as a grieving widow. If not, she'd walk away with nothing. Timing is everything, Cody pressed, his impatience cutting through. Not just when he dies, but how it's written down. For Lila, murder had become more than poison in a glass. It was a performance, dressed in legality, rehearsed for the benefit of law itself. For weeks, Lila had played the perfect wife. Measured words, gentle hands, the picture of devotion. But perfection always cracks. One evening, Daniel noticed her perfume. It wasn't the soft floral scent she'd worn for years. This was sharper, musky, a fragrance he didn't recognize. When he asked, she brushed it off. A free sample from the boutique. But the answer came too quickly, her smile too stiff. The next afternoon, Nora trailed her car into the city. Lila parked near a crowded cafe, stepping out in oversized sunglasses. She thought the disguise enough. It wasn't. Through the cafe window, Nora's camera caught her leaning close across the table, her hand brushing against Cody Vance's. A brief laugh, a whisper, and then their lips met. Reckless, careless, in plain view of strangers. Later, Nora slid the photos across Daniel's desk. Perfume, touch, public kisses. Sloppy, she said quietly. People who think they've already won stop hiding. Daniel stared at the images, his jaw tightening. It was no longer suspicion, it was certainty. Daniel had built companies, signed contracts worth millions, but no document had ever weighed as much as the letter he now drafted. Late at night, in his study lit only by a desk lamp, he wrote in careful, deliberate strokes. It was addressed to his attorney, a man who had served his family for decades. If I do not survive, it began. I ask that this letter be opened immediately. Inside, he detailed the suspicion poisoning his days, the dizziness, the evidence Nora had gathered, the whispers he had overheard. He named Lila. He named Cody. Enclosed was a sealed flash drive with recordings, photos, and timestamps Nora had collected. Together, it was enough to expose the conspiracy, even if Daniel's voice was silenced. When the letter was sealed and signed, he leaned back in the chair, exhausted but steady. For the first time, he felt strangely calm. If death reached him before justice did, at least the truth would not die with him. The house felt too quiet that night, as though the walls themselves were waiting. Daniel sat in the dining room, shoulders slumped, face pale in the flicker of a single chandelier. Every movement was deliberate, rehearsed weakness. Lila descended the staircase, a decanter in her hands, her smile practiced to perfection. "Darling," she said softly, "you've been so strong. Let's toast. To us, to the life we built." She poured the wine, dark and rich, into 2 crystal glasses. Her hand trembled just slightly as she slid one toward him. Daniel lifted it with shaking fingers, the performance flawless. The poison swirled between them like a secret, but under the table his hand moved with practiced precision. A shift, a small exchange. Her glass became his became hers. They clinked lightly. "To us," Daniel whispered, his voice thin but steady. Lila drank. At first, nothing, just the warmth of Cabernet coating her tongue. But within minutes, her smile faltered, her hand tightening on the stem. Her breath grew shallow, her chest constricting. "Strange," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The wine, it tastes—" Daniel set his glass down, untouched. For the first time in weeks, he sat tall, his eyes sharp, alive. "What you taste, Lila," he said coldly, "is your own ambition." Her eyes widened as realization struck. The trap she believed was closing on him had closed on her instead. The glass slipped from Lila's hand, shattering against the marble floor. She clutched at her throat, eyes wide, gasping as the poison began its cruel work. "Daniel, help me," she choked, reaching for him. But Daniel did not move. He stood calm, almost eerily steady, as though the weakness had never touched him. Instead of reaching for her, he reached for a small black device hidden near the table's edge. With a single press, the dining room filled with familiar voices. "If only he weren't in the way." Lila's own whisper echoed like a ghost. Then Cody's reply, "Then maybe we make sure he isn't." Her face drained of color faster than the poison itself. "No," she croaked, shaking her head. How did you?" The footsteps came from the hallway. Nora Quinn stepped into the light, her expression cold, a recorder in hand. "Every word, every plan, every kiss with Cody. We have it all." Daniel's voice was low, cutting through the room like glass. "You thought I was dying, Lila. But the only thing dying here tonight is the lie you built." Lila collapsed to her knees, the sound of the recording still playing, her own betrayal condemning her louder than any courtroom could. And with Nora standing witness, there was no escape. Lila crumpled on the floor, her breaths shallow, fingers clawing at the tiles. "Daniel, please," she sobbed. "Help me." For a long moment, he only watched her. Memories flickered, Her laughter years ago, the vows they had spoken, the home they had built. But all of it was gone, hollowed out by betrayal. Slowly, Daniel reached for his phone. Not to silence her, not to finish what she had started, but to let justice, not vengeance, have the final word. 911, he said, voice steady. My wife has ingested poison. I need an ambulance immediately. The dispatcher's voice filled the silence, sharp and clinical. Daniel followed the instructions, eyes fixed on Lila. You'll live, he told her quietly. But you'll live to face trial, to answer for every lie, every drop of poison, every betrayal. Sirens grew louder outside, piercing the night. Daniel felt no triumph, only the heavy truth and the cold certainty that justice would end this tragedy, once and for all. In the hospital, when Lila opened her eyes, the police were already there. Cody had been arrested the night before. His confession, along with Nora's evidence, sealed the fate of them both. The verdict came quickly. Guilty. The scheme turned to ashes. Lila's mask of elegance shattered, and Cody's hateful glare meant nothing anymore. Daniel did not attend the final hearing. He didn't need to see them fall. For him, justice was not about revenge. It was about survival and making sure the truth saw the light. Outside the courthouse, when asked if he felt vindicated, Daniel answered softly, Vindicated? Number. When the person you loved becomes your enemy, there are no winners, only lessons left behind, and the truth which can never be buried. The story of Daniel and Lila leaves us with questions darker than any poison. Trust, once broken, is rarely mended. Betrayal doesn't just wound, it lingers, reshaping how we see love, loyalty, and ourselves. But here is the question I leave with you. If you were in Daniel's place, what would you have done? Would you have called for help, letting your betrayer live to face justice? Or would you have let fate take its course in silence? And beyond that, can betrayal ever truly be healed? Or does it mark us forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to follow this channel. Because the darkest tales of trust and treachery are only just beginning.